If you were designing a bumper sticker slogan for Democrats right now, what would it be?
For right now, for me, it would be some version of reform, not destruction.
Shadi?
I think part of the problem is that Democrats haven't had a bumper sticker for many years now. I think it's a party that's aimless and feckless and isn't really even a viable opposition party. So that's where we stand. But I think I'd say fight back, have some spine, have a vision. And I don't think reform is enough.
All right. Mine is simple. Had enough yet? With a nice question mark at the end, because I think that ultimately it's not going to be up to the Democrats to determine what their message is. Their message is going to be, we're not Trump. This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, no matter how hard we try. I'm Dana Milbank, and this week we're talking about what's going on with the Democratic Party. The Democrats, after losing the election, have been trying to plot their way forward at a time when the party's popularity is historically low. In the meantime, President Trump has set off a constitutional crisis, illegally slashing much of the federal government, resisting court orders, and making enemies of allies. What should the Democrats be doing right now? Does the party simply need different messaging or a major shakeup? I'm joined by my colleagues Matt Bai and Shadi Hamid to discuss. Hello, guys. Welcome to Impromptu.
Hey, Dana.
Hi, thanks for having us.
I'm getting tired of all the Democrats suck coverage in the media, as if there were something they could do that they're not doing. Trump is ignoring the law. The Republican majority in Congress is cheering him on, and there's a 6-3 Republican-appointed majority on the Supreme Court. So what can elected Democrats actually do right now that they're not doing?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, Dana. I agree with you. I think to some extent it's always easy to point the finger. Why aren't they louder? Why aren't they making me feel better, right? But look, I go back a long way with this, as you do. It seems like every bunch of years we declare a party completely dead and gone, and then it rises again. But particularly in the moment we are living in, this is not a question a party answers. There are two central things I think you need to understand. One is parties don't solve this problem. Personalities do in this era. This is a personality-driven era. Somebody with a message is going to solve this problem. It's probably not going to be until you get past the midterms, you get into a presidential cycle. To a certain extent, the grassroots solves this problem, right? We're already seeing the beginnings of a sort of democratic mirror image of the Tea Party movement. But parties as institutions, elected office holders don't solve this problem. And the second thing I would say is, whoever does solve this problem is not going to be in Washington. And this, to me, is the number one problem for the Democratic Party over the past couple of decades. It has been almost 30 years, 3 decades, most of my life since the Democratic Party has nominated for president a candidate who did not first serve in the United States Senate. That has been a problem for a while. It is a crisis at a time when people are so disaffected with Washington. This was a party that at one time highlighted a lot of voices outside of Washington and found its strongest candidates outside of Washington. It needs to get out of this city again and find a platform for voices elsewhere.
I think that the issue here is that you have a leadership in the Democratic Party that is just incredibly old. We're talking about a party that is effectively a senior citizen's home. And you think about someone like Chuck Schumer, who is, in some ways, one of the leading figure in the Democratic Party right now from the Senate. And it's not that he's not charismatic. It's that he's anti-charismatic. You look at this person, you hear them talking, and you can't help but feel to yourself, this man is not up to the moment. And part of politics is about the emotional aspect. It is about feeling good about your party. And I think that when I look at my Republican or conservative friends, a lot of the time they're actually excited to be Republicans. They feel the vibes. We as Democrats were always reluctantly supporting our party or our candidate. It's always about the lesser of two evils. So some of it is about vibes. It's about that incalculable thing where you feel like you're aligned with your own party. So I think that at least for starters, there has to be a real leadership shakeup. And that's why I'm excited to see more signs of younger, more inspiring Democrats trying to challenge incumbents in primaries. We need to have that new energy. We need to have younger folks in, and we can't rely on the old leadership any longer.
I would like to say, when we say we Democrats, I am in fact a Nikki Haley Republican and voted for her in the primary.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I think what I'm hearing from you guys is some agreement that there's got to be new blood and change coming from outside of Washington, whether, Shadi is saying in terms of the primary challenges, maybe that's what's needed. But I agree completely with Matt that the energy has to come from outside of Washington. Elected Democrats are doing the things they can do, right? The attorneys general are filing lawsuits. You got Janet Mills standing up and taking on Trump in the White House, the governor of Maine, and then getting, government contracts taken away because of it. They're doing their town halls in Republican districts. They blocked this anti-trans legislation. But there was one exception to that, and this rift opened up a couple of weeks ago when all but one House Democrats, opposed the Republican plan to fund the government, but 9 Senate Democrats, led by the aforementioned Schumer, decided to vote with Republicans rather than shut down the government, infuriating both elected Democrats and a lot of activists on the left. So what does this episode teach them or us about going forward? Who was right in this? And is it time to say not one more vote for Trump's agenda, no matter what?
I can get the pragmatic argument that Schumer was trying to make, but it just wasn't the time for that. If you think about in the medium to long term, to actually have a unified caucus and to actually energize the party and not create these divisions, then I think Schumer was in the wrong there. And the Democratic Party's approval ratings continued to plummet after Schumer made that decision, falling to even more historic lows. And I think at some level, you can't argue with your own base with popular opinion. If the majority of rank and file Democrats are despairing about their own party and are so negative about their own party, then you have to respond to that and actually look at the sources of it. But I think there's also just a broader issue here with the orientation of the Democratic Party today as a party of overeducated liberal elites who don't know how to speak authentically, who are out of touch, as we've been talking about. But I think it's also the fact that the Democratic Party is no longer a working class party. It is a party of cultural liberalism on issues that are often unpopular with the broad swath of Americans. We did mention transgender issues. On issues like that, the Democratic Party is not aligned with the rest of the country. So I would like to see the Democratic Party, for instance, becoming more culturally moderate, but also more economically populist. I think that's where the sweet spot is. And when we look at someone like Chuck Schumer, he sort of represents the reverse of that.
It's interesting. I am going to say something I rarely said in all my years of covering politics, which is I agree with Nancy Pelosi on this. And, I'm not a Democrat either, not that just shocks anybody. I am a culturally elite, overeducated liberal, but I don't like parties very much and dogmas. But Pelosi said after this whole Schumer business with the budget, and I do think it was an extremely difficult choice for a person in Schumer's position, and I credit him with that. But she said, maybe you make the deal, but I always get something out of a deal. And that to me was where the problem was, right? If you feel this is something you have to do because they're going to take the country off a cliff and you're not really holding the cards, as Trump likes to say, and you're really risking a default on the debt. And I get all that. Maybe that's not the place to have your fight. But then, they need your votes in this situation. You got to get something for that. You got to be able to go back to your caucus and say, we extracted some small concession, and he just kind of caved. And so I think both the optics and the substance of that were really problematic. The only thing I would say is, just because Shadi was making me think about it, I've talked about generational issues for a long time, and I'm in agreement. certainly that the Democratic Party has gotten too old in addition to too institutional. However, being younger is not enough. I mean, part of the reason the Democratic Party has stayed as old as it has in its leadership is that its younger generation just wants to say it's younger, but has no compelling vision or argument substantively with what the last generation did. I once wrote about Seth Moulton and trying to unseat Nancy Pelosi while we're on that subject. And I think the thing I said about it was, it's getting rid of the older generation because you have a philosophical distinction is a worthy cause. Getting rid of people simply because they're old is generally regarded as cruel. Mm-hmm. And I think that has been sort of the ethos of younger Democrats is, hey, we're younger. Well, that's fine. But, the younger Democrats I've written about over the years, like a Gary Hart in 1983, 1984, they had a substantive bone to pick, right? They had a vision for the party, a governing vision that was different. I'm waiting for that. I think it could be very powerful. I'm not saying it's not going to arrive or materialize, but it has been a while and we have not seen it.
Yeah. But Matt, don't we have some of that with the younger progressive wing of the party represented by someone like AOC? Obviously, she's also aligned with a very old man, Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders is energetic.
Yeah.
He actually seems vigorous.
Yeah, but there's a reason. Well, he's 83, so I'm going to put him firmly in the category of leadership that should go. But also, being more left is not a new governing philosophy.
But it is a substantive disagreement with the sort of moderate.
I mean, it's basically a return to the 20th century democratic ethos. It involves no kind of modernization. No, we wouldn't be in this situation with Donald Trump and his administration taking apart whole essential pieces of government overnight. Had Democrats admitted at any time in the last 40 years that government needed to be seriously evaluated and reformed and streamlined, which they refused to do because they were the party of ever-expanding government. That is where AOC is. That is where Sanders is. More government always solves problems. More money always solves problems. That argument, I would argue, has run its course and isn't new. And actually, the social piece of it, it's interesting. I agree with you that the social piece of it's really problematic. I don't think it's because the party's not socially moderate enough. Essentially, it's that the party as a whole probably is. It's just too focused on those issues, period. I think what voters look at with this Democratic argument over cultural issues is they don't look at it and say, I don't think trans people should have rights. I don't think gay people should have rights. I don't think black people should have equal access in terms of opportunity or schooling. I don't think that's what most Americans say. I think they look and say, why are you always focused on other people and not me? Why are you always focused on bathrooms and not economic issues, right? There's a priority problem. The reason I tie those things together is I think you have a party that is backward looking in its philosophy and marginal in its priorities. And those two things have to be righted, and I think can only be righted by a messenger. And it doesn't have to be an incredibly new voice. It doesn't someone we've never seen before. It doesn't have to be somebody ideologically one way or the other, but somebody who can attune both of those things more to where the American electorate is.
Right. All right. I mean, this has been a pretty grim prognosis coming from both of you, I think, for the Democrats. But is this their Tea Party moment? In 2009, Republicans were at rock bottom after Obama's landslide and then bounced back with this wave of public anger. And now we're seeing it, the rallies with AOC and Sanders, Republicans canceling their town halls. Is this the Democrats' Tea Party moment, gentlemen?
I sure hope so. And whatever you think about AOC or Bernie Sanders' substantive positions, they're able to bring very large crowds out across the country. And you see that people are lining up, thousands of people, and they're excited. And I think that that's just something that we should value, that we want Americans to be excited about the parties that they're thinking about voting for. That's, I think, step number one. And it's a bit of a cliche, but sometimes you do really have to shake things up. Sometimes it's good to be anti-system. The system hasn't worked for a lot of Americans. And I think it's hard for us, if we want to say that we're members of the so-called elite, to really understand that level of anger. And when we talk about bumper stickers, it's worth noting that the Republican Party has been successful with bumper stickers because they've said things about the system and how it's failed. I mean, just think about Drain the Swamp. It's simplistic. It's a bit silly. It's kind of ironic coming from someone like Donald Trump, but at least it is a message that resonates and speaks to where people are at. Make America great again. Again, catchy, to the point, simple. So I think there are ways to kind of connect on that deeper, visceral level. And perhaps that's where a Tea Party-like movement can come in and say, let's do this. Let's knock some heads. Let's shake things up.
Yeah, I think it's heartening from a small d Democratic standpoint, right, to see that taking shape, if in fact it's taking shape, because you could be forgiven for waking up and wondering, are we now in an entirely different country where people have just lost their faith in the system and in their ability to influence the system and in the idea of democratic self-rule? And it's not just here, it's all over the world. The idea that people are or are going to show up to meetings with elected representatives and scream and yell and make their anger and their resentment heard is hopeful to me, in a sense, not just that because I think they're right on what's happening right now, and I think it could play a role in emboldening at least a few Republicans to stop some of what's happening, but also because I think the fact that they haven't given up, that people are willing to be heard is really cool. I will say on the bumper sticker thing, like Shadi, that what you're saying makes sense to me. I mean, great movements in American politics are easily summarized, but the bumper sticker only works because the underlying philosophy is clear, if not constructive. In other words, America first, MAGA, these underlie a very clear idea, right? Enough of helping the rest of the world, enough of taking in people, enough of otherness. It's time to get back to a common heritage and a common idea of what America is. And it happens to be my idea of what America is, right? In all things, politics, writing, language, advertising, whatever it is, the reduction of ideas to, a bumper sticker or a slogan or a line is about, as George Orwell pointed out, the clarity of your idea, right? We have all had the experience of trying to write a line and not being able to write it because we actually don't know what we're trying to say.
Right.
And so I think the Democratic Party's problem isn't, and hasn't been for a long time, the bumper sticker. The bumper sticker is going to write itself. It's one way or the other. It really doesn't matter what it says. What matters is what's the idea that it's carrying and symbolizing, that core central premise that resonates with people.
All right. Well, Matt mentioned the slogan, America First, but my slogan right now is America Second, because first we need to take a quick break. Welcome back. I'm Dana Milbank, and this is Impromptu. All right, so let's look at the situation on the ground. Inflation is rising, stock market's not rising, tariffs are threatened or imposed already, and consumer and business optimism is falling. Quite plainly, so far, Trump isn't delivering on his promises. Is this an opportunity for Democrats, and how do they take advantage of it when they haven't been able to do that on the economy before?
Yeah, I think Democrats have a real opportunity here because Trump is really squandering the moment. He had a real opening to actually build a majority coalition that could last years, if not longer. And by being so aggressive and so gratuitous in his overreach, for me, and we've talked about this in a recent episode, the real turning point was the whole slate of cases of Mahmoud Khalil, of detaining green card holders and denying entry to visa holders and people who want to come in for political reasons, essentially. And I think that really brought to bear, wow, Trump is even more dangerous than we thought. It's worse than we thought. And he's going out of his way to alienate large chunks of Americans when he didn't really have to do that. There was a lot of sympathy towards clamping down on immigration. There was a lot of sympathy with Trump and the Republicans on cultural issues, as we've talked about. He had a lot of wind behind him. And so I think the fact that Trump just doesn't know how to make use of the moment and instead he's going into overdrive, yeah, there's a real opening here. And that's why I think that this is the moment for Democrats to really reorganize, rebrand, and rebuild the party so they can actually take advantage of the opening that Trump is presenting for them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the good news for Democrats, I talk to them every day. I see a bunch of Democrats go to the dog park every morning and get an earful about how terrible the world is. The good news for Democrats is that he's really not that popular. In fact, he's historically unpopular. And we've seen, I think, the max out of his popularity, right? He's not going to be a 55% president and hasn't been. So the good news for Democrats is if you have a messenger, if you have somebody who steps forward, it may take a couple of years in this debate, or some movement inside your party that can get to that level of resonance with the American public, Trump is very vulnerable. And if I were the Democratic Party right now, if I were the DNC or the leadership or whoever constitutes a party in this age where parties are sort of this, tattered concept like all American institutions, I would be convening conversations, people who compete with me for airtime. I would be out getting governors together. I would be out getting mayors together. I would be out encouraging people to have these conversations and show the American people a diversity of opinion and a diversity of voices and a different generation, and let that process begin as soon as you possibly can. Don't wait for a presidential process, because when you find a voice that resonates and has some idea of what the future of American governance should look like, I think you will rival Donald Trump very quickly and have a very, positive electoral outlook.
And the other thing to add just quickly is that Trump is now weak on the very thing that he's traditionally been strong on, which is the economy. And in NBC News' national polling, he's gone down below 50% on the economy for the first time. So, and obviously we know about the tariffs and the stock market decline. So he, in some ways, Trump is torpedoing the good economy that he kind of entered into. And that seems to be a major own goal. But it's also worth noting that Republicans were trying to present themselves as the working class party, but instead Trump handed the reins over to a billionaire oligarch and gave him unlimited power to reshape our politics. So I think that's also worth noting, that on this very fundamental thing of actually aligning himself and his party with ordinary Americans, he hasn't actually been doing that while in office.
Right. Yes, I think there's a huge opportunity for Democrats because of Trump's overreach. The Americans wanted him to do something about the economy, and instead Elon Musk is running wild. And I think a lot of the polling, there's been made much of Democrat David Shor's polling about this deep hole that the Democrats are in. These things are pretty fluid. So, in a couple of months, we could be talking about an entirely different situation. And Trump has certainly left this gaping opening for them. Matt, a minute ago, you were talking about a messenger. And of course, I think it's going to have to be organic and come up from the grassroots. But maybe we could close with this. Are you guys seeing any potential Democratic savior out there? Do you want to pull somebody out of obscurity and launch them into leadership of the Democratic Party right now on Impromptu?
If I could pick the future of the Democratic Party, someone who I'm really excited about, who is well known, but, is also sort of under the radar, I'd say it's Jon Ossoff, the senator from Georgia.
Mm-hmm. I really don't, the beauty of it is it's usually somebody you don't see coming. But, look, I'm pretty bullish on the Democratic bench. I think the party's done a terrible job, has almost boxed out, a lot of its voices. But, if you look at the way Pete Buttigieg crashed the scene in 2020 and, was not taken seriously initially and actually showed that you could be smart enough, capable enough, once you got in front of people, to turn that around, I think Pete Buttigieg is still a powerful force in this party. I think governors like Pritzker or even a Jared Polis or even Gavin Newsom, who's, I know he's infuriating so many people, but these are powerful voices in the party, and they don't have to unite the party. They actually just have to ignite a movement strong enough to rival the movement on the right. So I'm sure there are people I'm not thinking about or we're not thinking about, but There are different permutations of what the Democratic Party will embrace over the next couple of years. And there's no shortage of people who should stand up and compete for that and be encouraged to compete for that.
I'd like to think that whoever this perhaps mythical person is who's going to lead the Democrats out of the wilderness is somebody whose name I may not have even heard of yet, but I do see as the emerging, inspiring figures to lead the left out of the wilderness are Shadi Hamid and Matt Bai. And I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Impromptu.
Thank you, Dana.
Anytime, Dana.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Demir Marusic and Chris Sulentrop, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Mili Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know what you think Democratic leaders should be doing right now. Send an email to impromptu@washpost.com. I'll be back in your feed next Tuesday, but in the meantime, if you're enjoying the show, be sure to go to your favorite podcast app and rate us or leave a review.